Democracy That Delivers is brought to you by the Center for International Private Enterprise. Now, to your host.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Democracy That Delivers podcast. I am Kathy Tai, and I'm here with my co-host, Kendra Brock.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kendra. I'm an Associate Program Officer here at SITE.
So today, we are very delighted to have our partners who are from the Philippines and Papua New Guinea here with us. I will introduce first is Professor Victor Dindo Manhit. Professor Manhit was the founder and is now the president of Stratbase ADR Institute. Stratbase ADRI is an independent think tank in Manila. The second guest today we have is Paul Bacher. So Paul is based in Port Moresby, PNG, and he's the head of Institute of National Affairs. It's also a prominent independent think tank in Papua New Guinea. So we're very happy to have them here to discuss recent elections, to discuss transparency issues, and also their work on BRI Monitor. Welcome, Dingdon and Paul.
Hi.
Thanks, Kat.
Hi. So maybe I'll start with some kind of also self-introduction from yourself. Dindo, maybe you can tell us a little bit why you decided to start ADR Institute.
We started in 2004. The idea was to provide a think tank that is not part of the academe, not part of government, but bridge the different sectors of Philippine society. That means private sector, civil society, with the academe and policymakers. And since then, we have tried to create a venue for discussions. We even have publications presenting both private sector, academic, scholars since 2004. And we have focused our efforts initially in issues of governance. But since then, we have evolved in issues in trade and investment, defense and security, and also climate or environment issues. So we're focused on those four areas that we chose to evolve in from 2004 to 2014. So we continue focusing those four policy areas. And we tried to position ourselves in the Philippines as a strong advocacy institute. That's why we are quite active in the media space and in making sure all our activities are understood or reaches the public, the general public in the Philippines.
That sounds very interesting. And Paul, INA has been around for about like 40 something years. And then you also have been based in PNG for a couple of decades. So maybe you can just tell us a little bit more about yourself. Like, why did you decide to move to PNG? And then how did you end up with INA?
Thanks, Kathy. I came, in the beginning of 1978. Yes, the Institute was set up in 1977. I came in 1978, initially as a volunteer, and was located in the Highlands with the Agriculture Department as a regional economist. And I never envisaged I would be here this length of time, but certainly PNG is a fascinating and very challenging place, but it certainly draws you in, and there are a lot of other people who've been here for extended periods of time because they've sort of been fascinated by PNG and its various challenges. And if you talk to development partners, they'll say, well, look, we've worked all around the world, across Africa and Asia, but PNG is a place that is significantly different. You can't slot it into a box. You can't apply models elsewhere. You can to some extent, but if you do, you'll often be thwarted. So you have to have a pretty good grounding on the issues and challenges of PNG.
Thanks, both. I think in both of your countries, you've recently experienced elections that have been quite dramatic. I think have captured a lot of the world's attention, and both of you have been quoted in the news coverage about those elections. So I'd be curious from your perspective, sort of what have been the key or kind of defining issues of those elections, and maybe also any sort of lessons learned for other countries in your region or for your own country kind of moving forward. Maybe I'll start again with Tindo and then with Paul.
Thank you, Kendra. In the Philippines, when you look at what transpired, of course, generally you'd say we had a legitimate process. Candidate was chosen, was voted on, and by midnight, because of our automated election system, we were able to see a trend already on who would win the point that a few hours after midnight, it is now the sitting president, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. But to understand the context is to look at it from how he evolved into the winner. Our actual election campaign period started February, but filing of candidacy because of the automated election, the preparation was October. And surprisingly, when we and part of the role that we play as an institute in the Philippines is we're known to run monthly surveys for public consumption. So we ran our first survey October, December, January, up to the very end with our partner survey firms. And surprisingly, Marcos was strong, but not as strong as where he ended. Because at that time, October, there was still this possibility of the daughter of outgoing President Duterte running herself. So there was this tight number between Marcos leading within the statistical error points and Len Robredo very tight within the 26% to 30% mark. But by end of October, early November, you saw them uniting. So suddenly Marcos hits 47% in our surveys. And Lenny Robredo, as the opposition, was simply halfway. That was 18-20%. But that story also reflects a deeper challenge in the Philippines is that how was Marcos able to reinvent his brand from a son of a dictator ousted in 1986. And this is where, and it really created a very divisive electoral season in the Philippines. But in the end, he won with 58%, with Len Robredo at 28%. And we are a multi-candidate electoral system. And the challenge really is how social media rose and became the strong source of information that even influence the decisions of people. I'm talking about Facebook, YouTube, TikTok. And of course, without going through the process of editorial fact checking, and people started to believe what they found in social media. And it became challenging for traditional media, who has become a proud part of Philippine society since the revolution that brought down the Marcos family in 1986. So they were able to go around it and was able to tell their story better. That's why I've said earlier, legitimately, we elected a new president, and they seem to have, they were able to tell a better story, frame the election debate by actually avoiding interviews from legitimate media. So it's a good strategy. It's direct to the voters, but they created that story to directly to tell the story to the voters. And I fear that they will move forward to try to shape the perception of now citizens vis-a-vis the government. Because now they're with government. If they have done it successfully during the campaign period, so we can expect them to use the same model now with the government machine, legitimate machine supporting them. So that's what we are trying to watch out from a governance perspective in the Philippines after the election.
Thanks, Dindo. And I think kind of this issue of sort of fact checking and the need for kind of clear, transparent narratives and facts is something we'll delve into a little bit later as well. But for now, I'll turn it over to Paul a little bit about kind of the key issues in the PNG election.
Thanks, Kendra. Yes, PNG, it's not a presidential election here. It's a Westminster-style parliamentary election. So it was to contest 116 seats, both the governor's seats and the open members' seats, and to be able to form a government out of that parliament. And the term of a parliament is 5 years. And unfortunately, it does appear that over each 5-year cycle, the standards of the election, instead of improving, seem to have actually been deteriorating. At the beginning, it did seem to appear that the 2022 election would be more violent than 2017. It may well have actually been an improvement. So there may have been less violence. It started off looking bad, but it may have somewhat improved. But nevertheless, the efficacy of the whole process and the reflection of the public will, it's a little bit hard to say that has occurred. There certainly was extensive abuse and a strong feeling that it was, to some extent, systematic. The problem partly related to the fact that the election seemed to be prepared very late in the day. So there was an adequate budget for this year, but there should have been an adequate budget for last year and the previous years to really put together a comprehensive electoral roll that people could verify for themselves, and that roll would then be accessible on the day of the voting. After the last election, a lot of deficiencies from 2017 were highlighted, but not very much was done to actually effect the changes that were being suggested. Some would say, well, look, the winners have little incentive to make reforms. And if you don't actually drive through those reforms with enough momentum from the wider community in the first 3 months or so, it's going to be difficult to push through those reforms during the subsequent period. And it has to be recognized that at the end of a long and expensive process of an election for the different candidates, there are 53 parties that were contesting, and then a lot of independents as well. They've used up a lot of money. Many of the seats would have, up to 75, in some cases more than 75 people contesting the seat. So the management of that process is very challenging. But it's, yes, we came up where in many cases it seemed that 50% or more of the potential electorate in a constituency found their name wasn't on the roll and they weren't able to vote. And even then, the system of voting around the country was very different from place to place, and certainly widely ignoring the individual discretion to be able to make their own selection. So in the Highlands, a lot of it was based on community decision making, which would say, oh, okay, the community has talked to such and such a candidate and they say they will deliver something, so we've agreed to give most of our votes to them. And so they just do a subdivision of the votes. And but whether they actually consulted the whole community or whether it was just a few leaders who've made that decision, money is widely highlighted as one of the problems. So the incentive to get into office is fueled to some extent by the rewards of apparently gaining office, particularly the things like the district constituency grants, but also by the costs of financing. And so those who actually had, one, a lot of money to be able to stand and contest their seat, but two, in many cases, those that had either the willingness to bypass the rules, and many candidates did have that readiness, and two, that they were well connected with the returning officer. So the electoral officials were their officials connected to the existing sitting member, and they're not going to bite the hand that feeds them. So they then bring in a whole series of electoral officers, counting officers, and so on. And there's a certain inevitable bias in that. So a lot of issues, and a real concern that unless we can address these sort of issues now, the next election, which will be 2027, will be significantly worse. And people are really worried that, yes, the outbreaks of discontent that were shown, where people went and destroyed ballot boxes, or in some cases even houses and schools, that could escalate if people are not satisfied that they're able to achieve something. Now, Dindo is highlighting electronic voting. We do not have electronic voting. Yes, there is a website, but the process is very manual. Because it's a preferential voting system and you progressively eliminate the different candidates and then get their second and third preferences, the process is complex and very time consuming, and that creates frustrations as well. So we haven't even got the final counting on a series of the different seats, including the National Capital Governor's seat and 4 or 5 other provinces as well. So,
Paul, if I may just follow up a little, based on what you said, corruption sounds like a huge issue. And I wonder, so during the kind of campaign season, candidate Marape basically kind of the campaign promises is like, we want to kind of take back the resources. And with a country that's kind of full of natural resources, with a lot of foreign companies' presence in PNG for gold, tin, timber, all kinds of natural resources, what do you think will happen with foreign businesses' kind of interest in PNG? Will the next administration really drastically change its policy on this or not. And another kind of question related to this is infrastructure, right? So PNG also is a country that relies heavily on good infrastructure to make sure things are kind of functioning in country. And so with kind of rampant corruption, as you mentioned, that took place in election, what do you think will happen in kind of the infrastructure space? Negatively, I assume, but how?
As you say, well, it is a resource-rich country in terms of minerals, oil, gas, fisheries, forestry, as well as potential for agriculture. The population is still relatively modest, although we don't really know what it is because we haven't had a census, which was meant to have happened in 2020, but COVID disrupted that. But yes, the government's made commitments since 2019, but really the previous government was making some similar commitments, although not quite as vocally, on taking greater control over the natural resources. And yet there's a strong public concern that, yes, the private sector is concerned about, uncertainty and a readiness to change the rules. And certainly some of those resource sector rules have been long in the pipeline for some changes that have been drafted and which have been held back. But nevertheless, some of the major resource projects have been delayed for some time. My suspicion is the new government will be keen to get some of those major resource projects up and running. They've been long in the, as it were, in the pipeline, and they'll want to sort of be able to deliver some of them, partly because they want to be able to see some revenue coming in and some economic activity occurring. But nevertheless, there is a lot of concern that, well, look, one would be better off trying to build the economy, encourage domestic and overseas investment, rather than the take back where you're actually moving resource ownership from one party to another, and you're not actually building up the overall economy and not generating employment, which PNG desperately needs. And we've seen this problem already where a major resource project, the Porgera mine, ended up being closed. And really the only outcome of that was that 3,600 people lost their jobs and all kinds of associated people. It hopefully will be up and running in the near future, but it's taking a long time to actually to progress. So there is a lot of public concern that although there are these statements about improved resource management, there have been long time statements about, for example, controlling log exports and replacing them and requiring domestic processing. And yet the year seems to keep getting deferred. Is this because some of those resource entities are helping to fuel the campaigns of some of the political parties and candidates? Certainly, logging companies have been actively involved over many years, and a number of other companies in the pharmaceutical and certain other industries have been involved in trying to influence things to reduce the resource taxes and to be able to access resource concessions without going through. So PNG is a country with profuse, extensive constitution and laws, but the laws are widely subverted or ignored for various reasons. When it comes to infrastructure, as you say, infrastructure is critical to be able to just gain basic access to communities that are often relatively remote. Costs quite a bit to achieve that because they're often relatively small communities and relatively isolated, and they can be up mountain valleys or they can be on isolated islands. So you need also shipping services that to some extent existed before but have faded, and so people are being denied as a result access to public goods and services, but also market opportunities, so and business and economic opportunities. So sometimes it does appear that the big ticket infrastructure projects are more attractive to some of the politicians, and maybe for sometimes the wrong reasons, because maybe they have bigger commissions or there's pressure from certain quarters to go ahead with some of those projects, to borrow for them and to go ahead with them, rather than some of the smaller projects that may be more useful and more sustainable and just provide more basic access to those markets and services, for example. And some of the other infrastructure that we've observed over the years, which seem to consist of one or too many conference facilities and sports facilities and so on, when villagers haven't really got access to sporting more community level sporting facilities. So yeah, these are some of the issues, and yeah, the whole system of governance and oversight, which requires that civil society partly is much more aware of the requirements, the rules, the procedures, and what could be achieved through a more open governance system to hold officials accountable when it comes to expenditure, because some of those, including some of those district grants that I mentioned, do seem to entail sort of substantially excessive costs in some of their infrastructure. So those may be more local, some of the local roads or some of the local health. And again, often an inclination to push for good reasons as well as bad. You know, people are wanting to have universities in every province. People are wanting to have a big hospital in every province. Well, sometimes a more community province or a TVET school, a vocational school, and other type educational facilities in many cases may be more appropriate, and then trying to get the national universities up to a standard rather than trying to spread it so thin that you haven't got any standards at all in all the facilities. So
Thanks so much, Paul. And I know one of your excellent case studies on the BRI monitor kind of focuses on just some of these issues of sort of, is it more cost effective, and kind of what are the costs and benefits of these larger university projects or dam projects versus kind of more community level. Kind of on the same topic of sort of corruption, infrastructure plans for the future government. Dindo, I know Stratbase has been quite active in sort of critiquing and providing recommendations for the former administration's Build, Build, Build program, and now has been quite active in developing kind of recommendations for moving forward for this administration. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on that.
What's good with the research that we developed focused on some of these initiatives by the former government with regards to the BRI of China actually created more transparency with regards to the general public and even key sectors of Philippine society, to the point that even the former head of the National Economic Development Authority, who resigned during pandemic, has even issued a statement that as Marcos administration settles down, maybe it's time to look at other countries for ODA. It's good to look at public-private partnership, and we believe we have contributed to making this issue, which was quite being, you'd say, managed by government, being positioned as big help for the Philippines. But when we were able to share and show, even using government data, if you'd remember, Kendra, even the Department of Finance wanted to stop our project, but we said, sorry, but our data comes from government itself. And we will not take back whatever we said. And they did not get back to us. I felt that they were simply doing a job by saying that they needed to say something against a report. But after a day, after receiving an official email, said we won't. And and the more we made it public, I think that's something that we all need to learn. That when you develop institutions, when you generate public support for it, my joke is that the Duterte administration is over and we're still around. And maybe that's what, and even the engagement with China will not be as strong as it used to be, because we made the issue with China a big issue in the last election, that the perceived bias of the winning candidate Marcos Jr. towards China, which he was, following the Duterte line, then has slowly moved from that line to going to the middle, and maybe even farther more as cabinet secretaries were appointed. And something that we all need to understand is there's no reason to have papers, publications, if it's not understood or reaches the public. And because at the end of the day, it's just a paper, just like any academic research. And that's and policy making, policy decisions are so dynamic that you have to understand that now, as with elected officials, public opinion is always a good partner in raising issues of transparency, accountability, and also foreign failure of foreign partnership to have really prospered. Now nobody's talking about ODA with China. Can you imagine that in the span of 2 months, 3 months of the administration? Everybody's talking about possibility of public-private partnership.
That's impressive. That means your work is, you are seeing impact.
The first thing government did was actually the previous government on the last few weeks canceled their the last remaining projects with China. And when people asked me, I said, I think they're cleaning up their legacy.
But I gotta say, like the reason why people wanted to push, or the local civil society groups want to push for more structured project going through the public-private partnership mechanism is because the Philippines has a very sound kind of foundation for PPP projects. Right. So then, like, basically, that means like the project itself can be very well governed and then will have sufficient oversight. I think that's like kind of the main reason.
And no cost to the Filipino people. In the case of the projects with China, it was perceived that it would be onerous, especially as we help the government help the public understand it, that it could have been onerous to the public. So even that Safe Philippines project, that was our third research. Uh, I think when we flagged it that there is this type of project, a lot of Filipinos realize there is such a project that will survey that in the name of peace and order will basically have surveillance in different cities using Chinese technology. That means, especially if you understand the cloud, you know where that surveillance system will go. That cloud will not be in this country. That data center will not be in the Philippines. So now there's now a discussion on that moving forward. But we're able to sometimes at times you just need to trigger things. And there if you are in the right direction, data driven, facts and evidence based arguments, you know that there will be a public support or constituency that will really, either if they don't know, they will wake up. And that's why in our last survey, I've not shared this with you guys, China remains to be the most distrusted country in the Philippines. And we published it in the month of July, on the first month of the new administration. They got even beaten by Russia. Can you imagine, given Russia's aggression in Ukraine? But they're the last two distrusted country in the Philippines. US is number one. Japan and Australia is statistically tied, if I remember it right. UK is a EU countries. Even India was number six. So even and ASEAN, some ASEAN countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, but China is way below.
This is very interesting. I mean, so we're almost running out of time, but I hope we will have another episode of podcast like dedicated to China's influence in PNG and in the Philippines, and also public perceptions of China or Chinese investment. Because I think I've seen a lot of different like Asia barometers, Afra barometers. They have a lot of, or Pew Center. They have a lot of public opinion surveys about how China is perceived in different countries. The findings are super fascinating, really. So in Southeast Asia, Malaysia and Singapore, I think they actually they hold higher positive opinions of China than the US. So it's interesting. But
So totally different in the Philippines.
anyway, going back to what you mentioned about the BRI model case studies and then the Say Philippines findings, you found it the most interesting. Is there any other one you want to share?
Of course, the two infrastructure project, Kaliwa Dam and also the Chico irrigation project. I think as we have identified that even our own government audit office, that means it's their job to give and analyze recommendations on the performance of this project, have flagged this. So we really don't know where it is now. Has it moved forward? Is it under review? So there's no mention of it under this new government.
That's very interesting. So I guess then you guys will have to continue to push on then
Yes.
for continuous transparency of these projects.
It's something that you should also understand. There was fear in the 6 years of Duterte, and basically the governance advocates have disappeared. So a lot of people got surprised when we did not only do the project, but we only made it public, to the point that ambassadors keep on telling how I am. I said I think I will outlast Duterte. So we outlasted him. As I've said, he's now back in Davao City. He'll grow old there maybe. But the Filipino people have benefited from it because even Marcos spoke of the need to be more transparent and accountable. That's why he's pushing for digitization. Something that I have not shared, that the new budget and management secretary came from our team during her younger years. And she's been an advocate of accountability using technology. So suddenly everybody's talking about accountability when everybody was fearful of saying things in the previous government. Hopefully it continues. That's why people are surprised why I am suddenly cautiously optimistic with this government, especially with appointments of ministers or secretaries that are not aligned with the Marcoses, never been identified with them, and the strong statements of cabinet secretaries against China, especially on territorial issues from both the military and the foreign affairs establishment, and the strong statements for more PPP instead of ODA without mentioning China. So, and also Japan always being mentioned as the best model. So they're just avoiding mentioning China, but oh, Japan has done a good job the past 5 years. Maybe the Indo-Pacific Economic framework that was launched. Hopefully, this becomes forward. So that's how government actually. That's why one of the signatories is a government now. So and everyone's trying to be quiet. But I think China will still push things here. Maybe trying to watch how. That's why we decided to run that survey. So sorry, the public says we don't need you. Or it's the same. I use the same survey firm that projected that Marcos will win. So the government cannot attack my findings now on the trust on countries because that when you question the credibility of this company, then you question also the credibility of the popularity of the president.
Thanks so much, Tindo. That's fascinating. Kind of hearing the interrelation between transparency and government policy and different elections. I know we're kind of running low on time, so I may turn it over to Paul to talk a little bit about kind of the case studies that INA has done in PNG, sort of any findings you find particularly interesting or want to highlight there.
Well, those are very much, Kendra, are very much pending. We have got issues like potential Wafi Golpu mine potentially developing and the issues of where the energy is coming from. I think there's generally a feeling that the major hydro, the Ramu hydro, should be put on hold unless it can be a lot more competitive in terms of power generation than at the moment. The PMIZ, well, the minister when it was being initiated way back in 2009 and those subsequent years, he's regained office after 2 terms out of office. He's sitting in the opposition at the moment, so we'll see what his level of influence may or may not be. Clearly, the whole issue of power generation, of communications is going to be critical for PNG. The government has made statements to the effect that friends to all, enemies to none. So trying to take that neutral position and engage with different partners. Certainly there is a lot more proactive engagement coming from, including for infrastructure investment coming from other players other than China. Although it takes a while to for those to actually be instituted, to roll out. I suppose there is, there's a feeling, well, look, we don't want to be told what to do by anyone. We don't want to be told by any players, or you shouldn't go with them because they're all problems. Because clearly there are some things that are appealing. For example, China offers a lot of scholarships, and if you get scholarships, then you're going to create a lot of linkages with people who then get to know that particular country. Some of the other countries could learn to roll down some of their restrictions, migration, travel restrictions, get some more scholarships out. These are things that win hearts and relationships. But certainly rolling out and making sure that those options are genuine and that they are going to be competitive. But certainly there is a concern. People are watching what's happening in the Pacific. They're seeing, what's happened in Solomon Islands. Obviously, most people in PNG are focused on, making ends meet, and they're living out in rural areas. But the younger community, those who are engaged with communications and so on, are certainly watching and feeling concerned about the domination that seems to be happening within the Solomon Islands government and within the community. And PNG and Solomon Islanders are very closely connected in many ways, from sport to culture and social linkages. And yeah, there are levels of concern. They're watching what's happening in other countries like Kiribati, and certainly they're hearing the feedback that is coming, which seems to be rather sort of autocratic, coming from some of those governments sort of aligning with China. So there's a concern, but at the same time, opportunities are being made available, which didn't seem to be available before. So people and governments are looking at that. But there are players certainly in amongst the politicians who are gaining office, who are concerned on governance issues, from resource logging, for example, and other resource issues. And the public civil society doesn't have a strong voice in PNG, except through, I mean, there are a small number of the policy think tanks, both the public financed ones and the more independent ones, if you like, that raise these issues and have networks. But the churches are certainly the strongest civil society, if you like, if you call them civil societies. They are a potential voice. By and large, they keep silent on issues, but certainly the Catholic Bishops' Conference and I think the PNG Council of Churches, particularly the Catholic Bishops' Conference, made some strong statements about concern over the electoral process and the deficiencies there. There are a lot of discussions about the pros and cons of going for a biometric voting system, how that would actually be handled out in rural areas. And again, you've got to make sure that it's rolled out early enough and is even there. You know, just because it's electronic doesn't automatically make it. And you'll find that in rural areas, we'll just put it all aside and we'll just do this block voting or something else. So there would need to be a lot of early electoral awareness. It would be nice if we could reduce the pressures that were there. But I'd be fascinated to be able to follow up with Dindo and others in the region on going right across to India on the mechanisms and the applicability of biometric, because certainly the government's interested in doing it. In fact, they were interested before this election, but it was far too late in the day to actually be able to implement. And again, there is a civil society distrust of government and any automated things where you're going to stand in front of a camera and you're going to have your information and records taken down, especially if it may have a big badge up saying Huawei or whatever on it. But there's a distrust. So there would need to be transparency in rolling out, transparency and a lot of voter awareness. And yeah, but it could help, but it's an interesting scenario.
I like that civil society organizations and think tanks are also learning from each other within the region. I think that's the kind of a democratic learning we wanted to see more and more. And really kudos to both of you for the organization's dedication to inclusive growth and democratic governance in your own countries and then to the broader region. I think the work that you're continue to kind of focus on to drive greater transparency and accountability in really all aspects of, policy forums and government realms, I think that really is very meaningful, important work. So I think we're at time or a bit over, but this is a fascinating discussion, and we would definitely want to invite you back to talk more about potential foreign investment implications in your own countries in the future. Thank you all.
Democracy That Delivers has been brought to you by the Center for International Private Enterprise. For more information, please visit cipe.org.